This is a presentation of the Sports Source Digital Network, presented by Hearthside Bank.
The Lady Vols road in the NCAA Tournament isn't an easy one. Even their first-round opponent has the makings to be a dark horse. So how did they get out of that first round? We'll tell you next here on the Sports Source Digital Network. The Lady Vols are dancing for the 43rd straight time, the most in NCAA history for women's basketball. And the road is not easy for the Lady Vols, even though they make it seem easy with how many times they've been able to make it to the dance. Their dance starts in Columbus, and I think even from the jump, it's not going to be an easy run to try to get to that national title game in Tampa, because I think the first team that they face could be the dark horse of their side of the bracket, and it's when they meet South Florida on Friday. What I think makes South Florida a very dangerous team is when you look at what they've been able to do this season. As a quick refresher, they were third in the American Athletic Conference standings, and they went on to win the AAC Conference Tournament Championship after defeating Rice 69-62. And when you're kind of maybe looking at some commonalities between both the Lady Vols and South Florida, they have a number of similar opponents. They've had 3 games in the SEC. They've taken on UConn. And before we jump too much into maybe what that matchup looks like, it's important to remember that it's been a little bit since the Lady Vols have played, since they had a disappointing exit from the SEC tournament. And we hear these conversations about the Lady Vols feeling tired and they're losing their attention to detail, and they get into this idea of playing hero ball, which we talked about in our last episode. And if you missed that, let this be a chance to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the conversations happening here on the Sports Source Digital Network. And it seems that the time that they've had off has been greatly beneficial to this team. It's exactly what Joel Spear was telling us earlier in the week, that they feel refreshed. And I think the greatest sign that a team is refreshed is how the practices look, right? You practice good, you play better. And I think that's where this team is right now. There was a funny moment where she was talking about how competitive practice has become, that sometimes, or I think it was Samara Spencer who mentioned it, that you almost kind of forget that the jersey that you're playing up against actually is another one of your teammates, but it gets so competitive and you're arguing against fouls and what certain plays look like. And I think that highlights the energy that this team has found. I think if we're honest, the last couple of games, they haven't had that same type of energy that they've had in the beginning of the season. And now that they're having more productive practices, even Kim Caldwell believes that the practices have been a little bit better. I think that's a sign that we should be encouraged with who they will look like when they get to that first round of the NCAA tournament, and maybe we can flush what we last remember in the SEC tournament.
A lot of focus on us, getting back to the little details, focusing on, box outs, rebounding, team defense, and I say our offense has looked a lot more better in practice, just like moving the ball more and knowing where each other are going to be.
I think the one thing that the Lady Vols need to make sure that they pack up in their suitcases and bring with them to Columbus is their energy. That contributes to so much of those effort kind of plays, to the aggressiveness when you come to battling on the boards, and that will be a huge key to this game if Tennessee is able to win it. Not because it's your broad paintbrush, rebounding will win games, you got to bring the defense, but they're going up against a South Florida team that is very competitive. When we look at their schedule, they have played UConn, they've played Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, and South Carolina. All 4 of those games, granted, came within the first 15 games of the season. So how much different would those games look if it came at the end of the season versus the beginning of the season? Who really knows? But we know that they have a taste of SEC play. We know that they have a ton of common opponents. And when we look at those games, granted, they were all losses. They were competitive. The rebounding margin was never really greater than 10. I'll take a look at my notes. So when we look at UConn, which was the 3rd game of the season, they lost that battle 35-27. The next one against Vanderbilt, 43-37. They actually won that rebounding battle. They won the next rebounding battle against Mississippi State, 41-35, but then lost it to South Carolina, 35-34. And those are very physical teams, and they still were able to match it because they've got great size to their advantage. And that's kind of where you get into what Joel Spear was talking about and what we talked about over on my channel at Full Disclosure Pro about this idea of playing hero ball. And it's about relying on your teammate that, whatever shot they take, they're going to make it, and I don't need to go crash. I don't need to make sure I'm boxing out to try and help set up a nice, offensive rebound to get a second chance point. And it's that type of attention to detail that has been a key focus for this team in their time off that they also need to make sure is in their suitcase when they leave for Columbus.
And kind of overlooking things that the coaches told us that we need to focus on. We kind of let those slip by. But, after you lose a couple games, you kind of have to self-reflect. So I think that's what we did as a team.
And I think part of what makes South Florida a dark horse on Tennessee's side of the bracket starts with their head coach, Jose Fernandez. He says that this team could do something that the program has never done before. He has a lot of confidence that this South Florida program could reach the second round of the NCAA tournament for the first time ever, which is a totally different mindset and reality of accomplishing goals than what the Lady Vols have been able to do. So these are very different programs when you look at the history of what they were able to do, but they're hungry and they have the belief that they can do it, and they have a little bit of tournament experience. Their head coach is now in his 10th dance in the NCAA tournament. He kind of has an idea of what their routine looks like, and when you do go back to the SEC conference games that they did have, they had some decent scoring from the field. I think they're okay from the three-point line. They don't take a ton of perimeter shots, maybe 15 a game, which, really isn't too much. But when we look at some of the players that have caused damage in those UConn or SEC type games, it's Mame Dembele, it's Victoria Blasic, and it's Sammy Puisis. They are very great contributors for this team. You look at the last two games, and it's Puisis against Mississippi State and South Carolina. She had 22 and 19 points respectively in those matchups. They are a really good team from the field. I'll look at my notes and refer to that again. The one time that it was incredibly lopsided, and it was the most lopsided loss that they had in that 4-game stretch that we're talking about, was against UConn. They lost the field goal battle, I guess if we can call it, 66% to 32%, or 36%. They just did not have an answer that game. Then we look a little bit later where it was a little bit closer. So against Vanderbilt, it was 38 and 37%. So they're able to not only win the rebounding battle, but they stayed close in the field goal percentage. When we look a little later to Mississippi State, they lost that by 2%, 38 to 36. And then it was just, again, lopsided against South Carolina, who converted 51% of its tries, and South Florida was kind of around that 39% margin. So when you mix decent production from the field and then you're aggressive on the rebounding battle and you match them in those second chance points or in transition buckets because you get a nice defensive rebound, this could make for a really interesting game. And that's when Jewel Spear, when she's talking about the team being gritty and practice, they need that type of grit and that type of focus when they get into this matchup against a team that is hungry to be the first team to make it to that next round.
With the selection show yesterday, it was just fun to see everybody smile and hearing our name being called. But also we've had people that have had experience at the NCAA tournament. So just having a goal in front of us and, like I said, just focusing on the first game at hand and then going from there.
But I think Tennessee has the makings to be able to get past this supposed dark horse that I think South Florida could potentially be on their side of the bracket. I'll also be in Columbus should they make it past the first round. And if the higher seed wins, they'll, of course, take on 4-seed Ohio State. And that would be a massive, massive matchup. It almost kind of seemingly feels like a Sweet 16 type matchup in that second round. So make sure you head over to my channel at Full Disclosure Pro. Give me a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the post-game reports, locker room conversations from the first couple of rounds of the NCAA tournament. But until then, I'll see you back on this channel next week. So make sure you subscribe to Sports Source Digital Network so you don't miss out on any of the other conversations around Tennessee athletics. Talk to you guys then.